So, warm welcome everyone to this high-level panel on Geneva Peace Week 2023. Colleagues, this is very important. So, on behalf of the Geneva Center for Security Policy, the GCSP, we are most delighted and absolutely privileged to invite you all and welcome you all to this panel session on building trust, building peace, actionable, and I stress actionable, priorities for the summit, a conversation about the future. We look forward to spending the next hour and a half preparing for the future. Really preparing for the future. No pressure. As we gather here in Geneva for Peace Week 2023, the challenges, the individual, the community, the national, the regional, and also at the global level, the challenges to global peace, security, human rights, and developments are formidable in the very worst sense of the word. As the UN Secretary General in 2021, in Our Common Agenda, put it, humanity faces a stark and urgent choice, breakdown or breakthrough. And this was even before Ukraine was invaded and the war in the Middle East broke out, not to mention everything else. So action is required to build trust and in order to rebuild peace. Action alone, however, is not sufficient. One thing I think most of us have come to realize in the last few, even perhaps only a couple of years, is that we know so little. What we came to think we knew, how to do peace building, if only the resources were made available, if only we did it the right way, according to the peace building manual, things would work out, peace would come at some point. Perhaps slowly, but it would come. I think for most of us, the realization has been painful that developments around the world has shown us that it is much more complicated than what we thought. We are faced with an ever greater fragmentation, polarization, and securitization. The world is increasingly getting on a war footing. So in response, the UN Secretary General launched a process to develop a new agenda for peace and initiated the preparations for a summit of the future to be held next year. A process that is well underway, but still has a long way to go. And the original purpose of the summit was to provide, I quote, once-in-a-generation opportunity to reinvigorate multilateralism, to address gaps in global governance, and reaffirm existing commitments, including the Sustainable Development Goals and the UN Charter. However, in the current crisis, what key priorities could and should be established in order for the Summit of the Future to deliver real concrete outcomes, even amidst the current spiraling deterioration of interstate relations? What can realistically be achieved? And who needs to do what? How can countries, organizations, and people like ourselves contribute to building peace in turbulent times? This, ladies and gentlemen, will be the focus of our conversation. And we are extremely fortunate because we are gathering here as the Geneva Peace Building Platform with our extended partnership network across the world. There are so many individuals, organizations, and countries committed to make a positive difference. So I warmly welcome you all to really generate your best ideas, your best thoughts, critical questions, as we later on open up this for an inclusive conversation. We have, however, decided to invite a few preeminent senior experts to kick off the conversation. And we are immensely delighted to introduce them. I will introduce them as they come on for their first intervention. And as a good Swiss, we will try to keep focus on the 3 minutes of an initial injection before we open up the conversation further. So without further ado, and of course the topic, as we are focusing on, is building trust, building peace, actionable priorities for the summit. And I'd like to invite initial reflections on this topic, first handing over the word to Ambassador Ahmed Abdel Latif, who is the director of the Cairo International Center for Conflict Resolution, Peacekeeping and Peace Building, and since February is also chair of the new AU network of think tanks for peace. He has a long distinguished career, both multilaterally and nationally, and with almost regarding every single topic that Geneva covers within its different agencies. So please look up his biography if you want to have the long extension. Ambassador, over to you.
Yeah, it's working. Okay. Thank you very much for the kind invitation, for having me, and for your kind words of introduction. I think you've already laid the background and setting the stage for our conversation. It's a very dark hour for those who want to further the cause of peace. I come from Egypt, Middle East, next to on our borders, epic humanitarian disaster is unfolding of epic proportions, where humanitarian access is not guaranteed, civilians exposed to armed conflict, and it really, we are powerless in front of this, and this and many other crises really show the scale of what we are confronted to, but also the limits of existing international action. Security Council has a main responsibility for international peace and security that it needs to take upon. So I think this is the background. I think this is important to for a while there was a literature, international relations, saying armed conflict has receded. It's all about transnational threat, etc. And we see that the armed conflict is very present and at an unprecedented scale we did not think about in different parts of the world. And that is the foundation of the United Nations, the scourge of war. So in the Summit of the Future, I think it's an opportunity to review our toolbox, to improve our toolbox, and to think bold. And I think despite the lack of the challenges we face, we should not refrain from thinking bold. And think tanks and organizations like ours, like GCSP and others, have a responsibility towards that, because we need to make from this crisis an opportunity through bold leadership and bold ideas. A couple of quick points on the actions and the deliverable. Rebuilding trust, this is the fundamental cornerstone of multilateralism. Without trust, we cannot work together. And building trust, maintaining trust, nurturing trust, it takes time, but it takes also a very frank dialogue. We need to be frank, and we need to recognize, and this is a point that Egypt has been making for a very long time, that double standards destroy trust, and the selective implementation of international rules, of international humanitarian law, undermines fundamentally trust, and that needs to be tackled hand-on. Second point, conflict prevention. That is a fundamental cornerstone that we already, when we reach conflict, is too late. The new Agenda for Peace puts forward this as an important priority, and we have all the evidence that supports it. Pathways for Peace, an important report by the UN and the World Bank, clearly puts out, you invest $1 in prevention, return is $16 in terms of the cost avoided. Yet only 4% of ODA goes to conflict prevention. Why? This needs to change. And this needs a recommitment at a very high level to the prevention agenda, to taking it forward, and also to ensure it is also national responsibility, national leadership for prevention. That prevention can be also a sovereignty enhancer and make you less vulnerable and make you stronger And that is a very important thing that the new agenda and the summit can take forward and give a push to. Trust, conflict prevention. The third issue very dear to us is the issue of the nexus between peace, security, and development. And the UN is very well placed to take forward this nexus. Everybody agrees that there's no peace without development, no development without peace. But when it comes to implementation, it is very fragmented. It is not consistent. And we are spending billions of dollars on humanitarian short-term relief that do not spill over to long-term development, not are sufficiently supportive of peace processes. And I think, again, there is some positive developments. The IFI, MDBs needs to be part of this conversation. They are increasingly. But again, the UN, with its an international community, can give a strong push through a holistic approach and integrated solution to make this move forward. And we have a forum called the Aswan Forum for Sustainable Peace and Development, may you have heard about, that makes of this issue its top priority, taking the nexus forward, in particularly in Africa. And we're preparing for our next edition next year and hope to work with many others on this issue. Last point, climate change. We're 1 month away from COP28 in Dubai. Egypt hosted last year COP27 in a very difficult environment, yet we managed to have a global consensus on loss and damage. Very important, gives hope that in a polarized environment we can reach consensus. But we also, as COP presidency, and our organization was involved in this, launched the first COP presidency initiative ever on climate and peace, bridging the gap between actors working on these issues, between climate finance and peace-building finance, between climate mobility and its implications for peace and security. 100 million people will be displaced by climate by 2000 if we do not act now. So it's a huge issue of great importance. COP28 will be building on what we did at COP27. I think there will be further progress, but that is an issue of the future. It's an eminent issue of the future. Again, many people think it is, yes, of course, we all agree. And I was looking at a book on peace building in Africa of 2020 that gives an overview. There's not a chapter, it's a chapter on everything except on climate. There's no chapter on climate, you know, so this is 2 years ago. So this is, again, quite recent, and it has not translated into tools and actions to take it forward. I think in all of these issues, there is ability to move forward fast, at least. Issue from an African Union perspective that is mentioned specifically is the issue of assessed contributions to African-led peace support operations. African Union is the only regional organization mentioned in the new agenda for peace. We are seeing that more and more conflicts in Africa lend themselves more to peace enforcement operations, and African countries or members of the UN see that it's justified to have the support of the assessed contribution to this. And this is moving also. I think it's moving forward. And I think it's an important to take forward with reform of the Security Council, increased African representation, and tackling also within all of these issues, broader issues of global governments, global reform of global financial institutions. All of this should be part of the summit with very identifiable, actionable items that we can come back to further. Thank you so much.
Ambassador, thank you so much. That was a wonderful, a very ambitious 3 minutes, I must say. But you did raise, and you raised a whole host of issues that, and of course, very much listening to and appreciating, encouraging collective action, but with exercising national leadership in driving a kind of a nexus, which I think you expand not only peace, security, and development, but it was also about the climate and trust building. So. And of course, we just came out of a session this morning where we also focused on the strengthening or the revisiting, reformulating peace operations for the future. So wonderful. Thank you very much. Now I have my absolute privilege is to introduce our second speaker, intervener, which is Colleen Crenwelch. She is the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Bureau of Conflict and Stabilization Operations with the State Department. She has a long career where she has served in the most difficult and challenging context. I couldn't see one that is missing from your CV, I must say. So we're really happy that you're here with us. And very much look forward to hearing from your perspective where you see that the summit of the future could be most productive and relevant for the coming, tackling the coming challenges ahead. Over to you.
Well, thanks so much, and thank you, Annika, for that wonderful introduction. Annika did a really exceptional job setting the stage for today's discussion and laying out for us some of the issues we'd like to address. We all see that the challenges today are complicated, complex, and becoming ever more complicated and complex. In this environment, as we recognize that our approach to building peace has to evolve, we need to identify new ways of doing business and new ways of fostering trust, building peace, new ways of taking action to do those things. You know, and as my colleague said, you know, trust is critical. We cannot make progress in any of these areas without trust. We, the United States, look to address conflict both bilaterally and multilaterally, and of course we see that trust is critical. And in this environment, it is right, I think, that we discuss a new agenda for peace. And we, the United States, really appreciate the new agenda's focus on human rights, on international law, on the prevention of violence and conflict as a political priority. We appreciate its focus on placing women and girls at the center of efforts globally to build and sustain peace and security. Those are critical elements for all of our work. You know, the new agenda and the work of the Peace Building Commission complement U.S. efforts under the Global Fragility Act, a critical piece of legislation that was adopted in 2019, and its associated U.S. strategy to prevent conflict and promote stability. These two things together, this piece of legislation and the associated strategy, are meant to really redefine the way the United States works to prevent violence and conflict and advance stability around the world. And one critical element in the act and in the strategy is the importance of localization, the importance of local ownership, local buy-in of actions to address and prevent conflict and to promote peace. And we found that those partnerships really are key, not just in planning, but in implementing on-the-ground efforts to make the world a more peaceful, more stable place. And I'll talk more about localization later, I think. So I'll stop there.
All right.
3
Well,
minutes.
thank you so much. Wonderful. And also, just building on what the ambassador first said, and I really appreciate you raising the issues of human rights, international law, and placing women and girls at the center. And this, and of course, the main focus on the localization, which we have been challenging the panelists to have to identify one priority that is above everything else that they would like to see being adopted. So the principal Assistant Secretary has highlighted what there is localization. We'll return to that topic shortly, and actually that's a good segue, because now you might think that it's Mr. Kagoma next, but he has, as the new president of Interpeace, has volunteered to come up last, because he will touch on all the speakers before him. Interpeace deals with any peace-building challenge on the planet, so he has promised to give us the whole range. So therefore, it is now my privilege to introduce to you my dear colleague, Fleur Hayworth. She is head of the GCSB, Inclusive Security and Gender. And she's also head of the Secretariat for the International Gender Champions. And you wonder, why is she here? Because there was someone else in the program. We, of course, she has been a rapid reaction response to the fact that, the unfortunate fact that Madeleine Rees, the Secretary General of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, is unfortunately ill. She's watching us online, so we will still, I know that Fleur will respond to some of the things or speak to some of the things that Madeleine was talking. She's also handing over to you.
Thanks so much, Annika. And I can't pretend to do justice to Madeleine, who wrote the foreword of Christina Luntz's book on feminist foreign policy, as well as many other publications and documents of her own. But what I would like to pick up on is the ambassador's comments on needing to be bold. And the new agenda for peace itself makes a bold call for transforming gendered power relations in peace and security. Now, this may seem a bit abstract, a bit untouchable, but it really isn't. What I would say, however, is that the actions need to go deeper than the new Agenda for Peace proposes. So why isn't it that difficult? Well, first of all, we need to think about the three elements that it introduces. First of all, participation. Secondly, ending violence. And third, how we're financing. I'm going to start with the third and say why we need to think about the third and go deeper and think about the power at heart. The new Agenda for Peace recommends ODA development increases. It recommends funding for gender equality and civil society increases. All these are really great recommendations, but they're not getting to the heart of the political economy. You mentioned the World Bank pathways, inclusive pathways for peace report, and indeed we need to get to the root causes. We need to tackle what is at the heart of conflict and driving it. But what we know is that inequalities over the last few decades have grown. They are one of the biggest causes of mistrust. They are one of the biggest causes of conflict. And so unless we get to the heart of those inequalities, by tackling some of the root causes through our political economy, we're not going to achieve the transformative changes that have been called for. Now, again, this may seem a little bit abstract, but when we start to break it down through a feminist lens, and a gendered lens, it's really easy to see how this is actionable. We have a number of initiatives that are looking at gender-responsive budgeting and how we can have a feminist foreign policy that looks at gender equality from an aid perspective. But we really need to get to the heart of transformative economics, like donut economics, that are integrated not just gender equality, but also climate economics at the heart of them, so that we're not externalizing the contributions that women make, we're not externalizing the environment, but we're bringing it into the heart of our economic analysis. And these models have been applied and they're being used, but we need to mainstream them. The second is around ending violence. I don't pretend to have the solutions to that, but one thing I would suggest is that we need to shift our perception of how we're going to do that. And that starts with a shift in our security imagination. At the moment, we have a huge us versus them othering going on. We've seen it with gender equality. Women are being alienated, marginalised, discriminated against, and we're seeing it within and between countries. And the worst examples that Annika mentioned in her opening. I think part of this is the perception that security starts with the state. State security does have a role to play, and we need to think about human security. And when we start to balance those and rebalance those, we start to recognise that we can bridge the binaries, we can bridge the divides between us, that we can find the common humanity and compassion between us. And that requires us to then shift where the aid is going, where the finances are going, so that we do prioritise the development that you mentioned at the beginning. And then finally, to try and keep within time, the third piece of power is all our own individual power and agency within this. So I think we all contribute to the security imagination. We also all contribute to the economy and how we value the different contributions of members of our household, members of our communities. And we had we had a workshop this morning on meaningful participation, and it was really getting down to the micro actions that each of us can take to transform this power that needs to take place. Whether it's having curiosity, asking questions, giving up space for others. These are all the steps that contribute to those big, big transformative agendas that we need to take, that we need to see happening. So that's my opening. Thank you so much, Annika.
Thank you so much, Fleur, for that. Brilliant. I think you were bold enough to provide us not only with one action or recommendation, but a roadmap towards addressing this very important topic at the center, but should be at the center, one of the centers of the agenda. Wonderful. Thank you so much. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our next speaker. As I mentioned, it's the new head of Interpeace, our sister organization here in the Maison de la Paix, which is Itonde Kagoma. He came recently, served as the permanent representative of the International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies to the African Union, which of course is also one of the key focus geographical areas also now for the new Agenda for Peace. and also brings to the table a long distinguished career as a peacemaker for Matti Ahtisaari Foundation and for the Carter Institute Center, I should say, and so on and so forth. So it's with great pleasure that it's handing over the word to Itonde.
Thank you, Annika, and really a pleasure. I can say I am officially 4 weeks old. Is that appropriate? It's my favorite joke now, so I'll stop. But officially 4 weeks old as president of Interpeace, terribly embarrassing my colleagues who are plentiful in the room with such terrible jokes. But also in full transparency, I'm a product of the Geneva Center for Security Policy, GCSP, as well as an institution or academy rather, of the Graduate Institute. So it's good to be home. And in no way would I attempt to make redundant or reduce the substance of exchange as have been shared so far. But there are at least 3 pivot points around which I would wish to add a contribution. The notion of trust is absolutely fundamental. And sadly, the deficit of trust characterizes much of what we're discussing in the lead up to the summit of the future and more broadly. There is a deficit of trust with regards to international cooperation, not least of which pertaining to peace and security. There is a deficit of trust at a regional level where the perception of overt and more subtle interest dominates the ways in which traditional means of brokering peace are at times a distraction or an excuse for the advancement of the peaceful settlement to conflicts and further cooperation on matters of common concern. There is an absolute deficit of trust with regards to citizen participation in broader national state processes. And without an emphasis, as my distinguished colleague raised in the opening, on the nurturing, rebuilding, and reimagining trust, I don't think we can speak of a future summit in a viable way. But that also links to what my distinguished colleague here also raised around the notion of localization. I don't know if either Melanie or I believe Corey from Humanity United are here, but I've learned a lot this morning from the evolution of their own thinking around localization and the way in which proximity is utilized to also change the quote-unquote power balance of how we speak of quote-unquote localization. Proximity of actors, proximity of peace builders, and this gets to the core of the institution I'm currently privileged to work at, together with colleagues who are in the room, namely, how do we amplify those who are closest to challenges we are describing, not in theoretical terms, but through the lived experience, realities, and impact of communities in situations of conflict. And my dear colleague, who has reminded me of such valuable exchanges previously around the notion of inclusivity, and not in broad strokes, but with respect to systemic change. I ascribe to this agenda, and I think the missing piece is how you connect that proximate perspective to decision-making powers and centers of authority. And I think that's the challenge we face in getting to a summit, or rather an agenda for the Summit of the Futures, which is set, that has meaning and impact for the lived experience of communities moving through, enduring, through various forms of conflict. And we're set up to try to do that, but know that we cannot do it alone. And that's the challenge as well, I think, moving forward. Creating those spaces for all voices, in an inclusive way, at all levels, to have a say and shape a summit of the future, not as an event, but as a shared common concern for future generations. Thank you, Annika.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much, Etonde, for that, for unpacking and also elaborating on the concepts and principles of trust, localization, and inclusion, and then, of course, connecting it to the action bit, which is the decision makers. And, of course, we're super delighted here at the Geneva Peace Week that we have that combination of researchers, practitioners, and also the decision makers, also including on our panel, and we also have other members of parliament participating in this event this week. So we're super delighted. Colleagues, this is when you are thinking about questions, thoughts, recommendations, I will want to invite again our Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary to explore a little bit, build on what Mr. Kagoma said about localization, since you held back there for a bit. You got to be equal here.
Sure, thank you. No, I mentioned the Global Fragility Act and its associated U.S. strategy to prevent conflict and promote stability. These two together outline our approach globally to seeking to anticipate, prevent, and respond to conflict. And we've seen, as I said earlier, that localization is absolutely critical, though we have to engage with those who are closest to the challenges and those who know, as a result, best how to address those challenges. They're close to the challenges, close to the opportunities. And as we, well, backing up a bit, let me just say that that under the Global Fragility Act and its associated strategy, we're focused right now on 4 priority countries and 1 priority region. And those countries are Haiti, Libya, Mozambique, and Papua New Guinea. And then we're looking at the coastal West Africa region of Benin, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, Guinea, and Togo. So 9 countries. And we have a plan for those. We have plans for each of those 4 countries and a plan for that region, looking at how we're going to work with local partners to address the challenges we've identified. And I wanted to talk about those plans because in developing those plans, we put into practice this emphasis on localization. We held hundreds and hundreds, literally hundreds of consultations with local stakeholders in these priority countries to develop 10-year plans. We're trying to introduce a longer-term approach than we have in the past when it comes to addressing these challenges. So we held those consultations, brought into our decision-making, our planning, local voices, and we went beyond government at the national and local level to talk to civil society groups, think tanks, academia, the private sector, marginalized groups. We focused on bringing in the voices of women and of communities that often are left out of these kinds of discussions. And it was only after having those consultations that we developed our implementation plans. And now we are continuing those consultations as we look to implement those plans. And in many cases, it is local partners who are doing the work on the ground, leading the initiatives that we're funding, that we're supporting to address challenges in their local communities.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much for that. All right, dear colleagues, now is the time to put your item, your idea on the agenda for the future. And as you are thinking, we have 1 or 2 mics, I believe. We have a colleague who's going to share that with you. This is the opportunity to exercise leadership already here. Fantastic. And it could be your own idea, or it could be a question or comment or a follow-up to one of our panelists' propositions. It's coming right there.
Yes, thank you. My name is Dr. Walter Christman. I'm the chairman of the Global Challenges Forum Foundation, a Swiss foundation here in Geneva. And I want to make a comment and then open it up just for response to anyone who cares to. There is a linkage here on the timeline of the problems of the 21st century. We have, what do we have, like 77 more years to figure it out or something like this, so we better get on with it. But the details of that is mostly known. I mean, the kinds of things that we've seen in the financial crisis, COVID, the context, many of these things, we know what the challenges are. And the question is, from the Agenda 2030 and the Summit of the Future, is okay, so we've got like 5 more years to figure that one out. It's great, who's going to do it after that? What's going to take us beyond 2030? And I would suggest to you that we need a paradigm shift significantly toward resilience. And resilience is a parallel word that's running underneath almost every conversation and in every domain of what we talk about. And the notion of global resilience, I would offer you, as the end state of sustainable development. But it's unattainable because we do not have a global culture that it's adaptable to resilience yet, and that if we focused on culture change across not only the things we do, but in support of the next generation, the generation that's rising, to think differently and to interconnect them around the shareable values of the planet that we all know we share, but we can't seem to realize, that the Summit of the Future might think about who's going to manage beyond 2030, to what end, and how are we equipping them today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I actually bring in the youth as well. Colleagues, I suggest we take a few questions, and then it's first come, first served to respond to them later on. All right, colleagues, here's another leader. Yes.
Hello. Thank you so much for all the panelists and the moderator. Thank you so much. All the discussion points you deliver here is very impressive.
Please introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm Oka. Yeah, I come from the Myanmar. That is one of the Southeast Asia countries. So one point that I learned from that panel discussion is the building trust is critically important in peace building. And another point that I learned from the yesterday panel discussion is that peace is not possible without the justice and fairness. So I come from Myanmar. So as some of you might have known that Myanmar is now the fragile situation. We are now in the military coup. So Myanmar military committed, thousands of human rights violations across the countries. But all the international, interestingly, all the international community, many of the international community, not everyone, are pushing us to negotiate with them, and they are willing to bring them in the negotiation table. So my question is, how can we build trust with the human rights violators, especially with such military, so to get peace in our country? So any panelists can take up my topic and respond with 1 or 2 comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that very important question. Thank you. We'll take 1 or 2 more before we ask our panelists. Yes? Not everybody at the same time. How is this Summit of the Future going to go if there's such a lack of ideas? Colleagues, this is your business, our business. Yes?
Thank you so much for sharing. My name is Zach. I'm an exchange student from the George Washington University in the US, and I'm currently in the Graduate Institute right now. And my question is to all the panelists. So one of the defining characteristics of the 21st century is this increase in geopolitical rifts between countries. So can we even separate the security in terms of this great power competition and security cooperation in terms of international peace-building efforts? And if so, how do we build trust in these international peacekeeping efforts, perhaps without having the same amount of trust between the great powers and their security competition? Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for another important question. All right, I'm going to hand it over to the board, I would say. Please, who want to go first? Then you can actually pick the question. You don't have to respond to all of them, but...
If I could just react 1 second on
Absolutely, wonderful.
The localization issue. This is a very important issue. And we come from a spectrum of our organization works actually more with national governments and building national capacities on peace and security, peacekeeping, peace building. But we've come actually to also the localization agenda. We were engaged in northeastern Nigeria, Borno State, who was confronted to Al-Qaeda and to terrorist insurgency. So we had to work with the governor there very closely and with the local authorities and the local civil society. It was very enriching us to highlight the importance of localization. But I think it's important that this is also articulated with national level engagement and goes in sync with it, because they are mutually reinforcing. And that is something very critical. At the end of the day, whether it's in the Sahel or in Somalia, what we expect national governments to take ownership of peace and security situation. So, but of course, grounded in a societal support contract, working with local organizations. But they are at the end of the day are on the front lines also of this. So yes, localization absolutely, and we have not done sufficiently maybe to bring it to the peace security discussions, who tend to be state-centric because of the composition of our, the way the intergovernmental arena is set up. But I think there's a lot of potential indeed to further highlight it and bring it forward. So that was one element. Second, on resilience, I think you're very right to point out to this very important word. And I think we were with Interpeace actually partnering a few weeks ago in something called the Africa Resilience Forum, actually, which is an African Development Bank platform, and it has resilience at the center of peace of it. And I think just it's very important. We saw it in the COVID response, how important it is in our ability to face crisis, for preparedness, for overcoming them. But we need to weave it in, sustainable peace and development, because that is our ultimate end goal. And I think it is also, again, mutually reinforcing with it. If I may, on the geopolitical rifts. But geopolitical rifts have always been, I think they're particularly polarized now and they're particularly acute now, but they have been around also. And I think it's, what a bit bothers me, but then when we mention them is that, okay, then if there's geopolitical, we can do anything. Let's wait until the geopolitical rifts recede, and that's a bit also wishful thinking. So we have to manage within the geopolitical rifts the spaces that still can foster cooperation and dialogue, and that has been done in the past and still can be done, bearing in mind that these countries have rights and responsibilities, whether as members of the Security Council, whether as in other forums. So we need to channel that and manage it in a way that does not paralyze totally collective action. Thank you.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much, Ambassador, and of course reminding us of positive peace. And I see our Institute of Economics and Peace is also present. Wonderful. Who goes next? Yes.
So I will add a few thoughts before handing over to colleagues to address some of the more challenging questions on the human rights violations, perhaps. But I fully agree we need a paradigm shift to build resilience. I think one of the biggest challenges of the Sustainable Development Goals is that they're interdependent, and we're not very good at dealing with interdependency. And we tend to over-focus on one side or another, but we don't tend to be able as humans to see all sides, and particularly two contradictory sides at the same time. And I think that feeds into the geopolitical rivalry and competition we have at the moment, that we need to just step back, first of all, and recognise with the localisation agenda, for example, it's local and national and regional and international. Each has a role to play, but where is the power, going back to my original point, between them? And has that come out of balance? Do we need to rebalance? In terms of the resilience piece, we're very much focused on the short term. How do we move towards the longer term and the short term thinking? We still have to respond to the short term crisis, and we need a longer term vision. When it comes to the building trust and the geopolitical rivalries, I do think we've seen a bit of a hierarchy of rights, social, economic, vis-a-vis civil and political rights that have been contested and played out in the Human Rights Council and more broadly. And I think we need to recognise that all these rights reflect fundamental human needs, and all of them had a role to play in peace building, and that economic right to development needs to go alongside the civil and political rights for us to be able to bridge some of the perhaps ideological divides that still exist at a geopolitical level. And then just my final thought is, I'm not as well placed as colleagues to speak on the human rights violations, but this accountability and justice together with forgiveness, trying to find some mechanisms of moving forward, that's so difficult when there is continued violations taking place. And I think personally, without the rule of law, without some level of accountability within countries and between countries, we're going to struggle.
All right, thank you so much, Fleur, on that also. Yes, Tanda? Oh.
Thank you, Annika, and really thank you for the observations and questions. I was privileged many years ago to serve as one of several report writers for a Truth and Reconciliation Commission after years of cyclical violence and civil war. Privileged is not the right term, but I participated in that process. One of the findings, and I'm looking to our dear colleague who raised this question around the pursuit of justice and what it means for the advancement of peace and engagement with those who may bear alleged responsibility in the context of the advancement of law. One of the findings that came out was the need for that particular commission to name certain historical injustices that had occurred because they observed that the absence, or rather a culture of impunity, was leading to cyclical forms of violence and the perpetuation of other forms of injustices. And that has stuck with me for some time. And Fleur has indicated certain fundamentals which I ascribe to. And I think it's important we're having this conversation in Geneva, which prides itself having a tradition as a city of peace and the advancement of dialogue between parties who may be engaging in violent conflict in large form, but simultaneously and without contradiction or hesitancy, a proponent and a seat for the advancement of fundamental human rights. And we know that the adherence to fundamental human rights is not somehow put on hold in pursuit of peace, but a constituent part of what makes for durable peace. You know far better than I with regards to the context you come from, but I share that with you, also mindful that we have colleagues from Interpeace in the room who are struggling with similar kinds of considerations. There are a team from the Great Lakes who are sitting for some reason in the back upper corner. But one of the findings I've heard from them in these 4 weeks old days, as a joke, is precisely the way in which intergenerational trauma has the impact of blocking a political imagination for a future if it's not addressed. We talk about mental health and psychosocial support in relationship to peace building. But we're also talking about the way in which past wrongs, too light of a word, if remaining unaddressed, has grave effect for the advancement of resilience and social cohesion. I end here, Annika, in saying, to your point on geopolitics, and I ascribe to everything my distinguished colleague has said, but I would say, especially at this moment that you have described so well, the role of independent spaces, and I say that mindful of an institution I'm now privileged to serve as a head of, but the role of independent spaces, organizations, could not be more important as formal structures for dialogue and cooperation break down. And that's also a part of contributing to the Summit of the Future in terms of how there is complementarity between formal and informal structures, particularly when those official mechanisms are not working as intended. That's a nice way of putting it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Also highlight the importance of being independent, and as we are, most of us in Switzerland, inclusive and impartial as well. So wonderful. Thank you. Then, yes, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment again on localization and resilience. I appreciated the point that was raised there. On localization, of course, as my colleague noted, just because we emphasize the importance of working with local communities and work with local actors to the extent possible, it doesn't mean that we ignore national actors or that we don't work closely with them as well. It also doesn't mean that we ignore multilateral or regional bodies. We work through every avenue we can identify to improve our efforts to foster peace and stability globally. And in many cases, our efforts support national plans where they exist. I mean, we certainly don't want to get crosswise with a national development plan. We want to support it where possible, but we seek to bring in local voices, and in some cases to carry those voices to national governments when they aren't necessarily listened to by those national actors. So we are looking at all venues, even while emphasizing local action and local buy-in. And on resilience, we are working at all levels, local and national, to improve resilience especially in the countries in which we've chosen to focus under the Global Fragility Act. And we're looking, to promote resilience, we're looking to promote social cohesion, to help communities overcome divides, ethnic, religious, whatever they may be. And we're looking to promote inclusion, especially of marginalized groups and women, and especially in decision-making processes affecting local communities. And we're also looking to promote inclusive economic growth and security, and to improve government service delivery. All of this so that communities are more resilient and can better cope with the effects of climate change and can better resist the influence of violent extremist organizations. And I think we're increasingly focused as a government on fostering and bolstering resilience. I mean, we don't have all the answers, obviously, but we're experimenting. This is a work in progress, but that is an increasing focus of ours.
All right, thank you. Excellent. Now, dear colleagues, there's another opportunity, window of engagement. Yes, please. Yeah, at the very opposite from where you are now, actually. There are two up there. Excellent. Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. This is. No, but you mean. Yeah, that is the next one up. Wonderful.
Thank you very much. My name is Frank Kaitare. I work at Interpeace. I come from Rwanda. My 5 cents as somebody based on the Global South, peace builder based in the Global South. There are two things that were mentioned that I think are important. One is, of course, trust. Someone mentioned at the beginning that it has to be built through a frank and honest conversation, and I truly agree. So for the future to be better than the past, for me, there's one important aspect that needs to be genuinely questioned and discussed. It's, of course, peace building is inherently political, and politics is about interests. How is it possible? It's a question I'm asking the panel, maybe everyone in the room. Is it possible for peace building to be being inherently political, how do we go beyond a perception, at least in the South, in the global South where I come from, that sometimes interests are put before values. If we agree that it's the reality, if we want to have a better future in terms of peace building, is that really possible that we can have a situation where values come before interests? That's question number one. And I can give you an example of recent events with COVID, how when vaccines became available, I think it was very obvious how interests supersede values. And you can say it in peace building in general. Second, people who live in conflict areas are not just victims. They are human beings with great ideas, solutions to their problems. And of course, localization was mentioned. I totally agree with it. But my experience, not just at Interpeace, also generally in my career, sometimes what is called consultation is actually a process of validation. And I think that's another area where we need to have a very honest conversation. So consultation, not validation of solutions. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Excellent. We have another one up there, and then we have you. So we have the three. 1, 2, 3. The mic is already up there.
Hi.
4.
My name is Abiosi Davis. I also work at Interpeace. I've been listening to the panelists talk about trust, inclusion, localization. In the context of thinking about a summit for the future, what's the role really of thinking about young people? I haven't heard much. We talked a little bit about the intergenerational transmission of trauma, but if anyone would be responsible for creatively thinking about how the future looks different than the present, or changing some of these generational patterns that some of us who've maybe grown up since the Cold War and have seen the situation deteriorate, it would seem that it would be young people. So what's really the role and the thinking behind the place of young people in the context of the Summit for the Future?
All right, thank you so much. Yes. Here. Great.
Thank you. My name is Mary Velma O'Neill. I'm the director of a Swiss NGO that aims to protect vulnerable cultural heritage in Jerusalem. I returned from Jerusalem on the 12th of October. It was a very complex journey. I had been at a conference, and this is in response to the young woman who spoke. I had been at a conference in Bethlehem at a university called Dar al-Kalima, which focused on land, people, and culture, and it was in commemoration of the 75th anniversary of the Nakba. And at that conference, which drew artists, activists, poets, painters, creative people, statespeople, religious people from all over the world, there was just a wonderful, wonderful sense of movement forward. It wasn't exclusively an academic conference. So I think that we can probably admit, and you can contest this, that the constituents of Hamas, many of them suffer from intergenerational conflict, and many of them lost parents during the 2014 catastrophic bombing of Gaza. So my question is, as we are all perturbed extremely by this extraordinary violence. Well, one more thing. There's a big demonstration in Bern on Saturday. There's a vigil in front of the UN tonight for anybody who wants to participate, to show your activism. But my question to the peace builders right in front of me, what can we do? And how can we move beyond this cycle of violence that's threatening ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people at this point, with implications on Egypt and many other countries in the region? So, simple question. Please tell me, I'm desperate to know what you think, what we can do to move forward for them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We have one more over there. Thank you.
Thank you. Mariam Bilichodze. I'm a senior advisor on disarmament for Norwegian Red Cross. I just want to ask, how does the panel see building peace and building trust in the rearmament era? And, well, be it nuclear weapons or autonomous weapons race that is taking place as we speak and was included in the new agenda for peace. Short question, but feel free to answer in length. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you. Colleagues. Oh, we have one more? Yes? Give you a few more minutes to think. Good.
Thank you. Hicham Lemisi, Secretary of GIPRI, Geneva International Peace Research Institute. I try to talk in English, but it's not easy for me. I'm interested by the last question on the situation of Palestine. And my question is for all the panel. What we can do now in the situation when we talk on peace building, but in reality, it's only war building in speech, in ideology, and when we analyze now in foreign, in Europe in particular, in USA in particular, the vision of conflicts, conflicts in general is presented in a very manichaeist vision. It's always evil, good, like a religious stupid vision. What we can do on this subject? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, colleagues, some challenging questions. Who would?
I could pick up on the words of Madeleine Rees, who's meant to be sitting here, because she's spoken very vocally and written an article on WILF's website about the Israel-Palestine conflict. And she says we're at risk of a genocide. She is very clear in her view that international humanitarian law is being used both sides to justify violence, and that is the very opposite of what we need to be thinking about, that we need to be thinking about justice and the International Court of Justice, which recognises the need of the duty to prevent genocide and to have the... when I spoke to her this morning, she said, what would have happened if we'd gone in and tried to hold Hamas to account, to bring them before the International Criminal Court, to really have a different approach, which is not perpetuating cycles of violence. There are alternatives, but we're not acting upon them. She also would like to highlight, I'm sure, the militarization that you mentioned. You know, we had 2.4 trillion spending on arms. So when we talk about overseas development aid, and when we talk about 15% or 100 million going to women's civil society organizations, it's going up in bombs, it's going up in fighter jets, it's peanuts compared to the destruction that's being caused by the continued focus on militarization. And just a final point in Madeleine's words or shoes, in 1915, when WILF was formed, WILF is the first women's peace organization present at The Hague. It was also the time that the sale of arms was privatized. And in the feminist perspective that WILF is really pushing forward, we cannot separate militarization from capitalization. We need to really, or capitalism, I should say, we really need to understand how this system is integrated and act more holistically across sectors. I will pause on there. I can come back on the youth question, but while we're on Israel-Palestine, I don't know if anyone else has something to comment.
All right, thank you so much for that. Colleagues?
No, but I mean, I think there are just 2-3 steps that need to happen very clearly immediately, which is what we have called for is a ceasefire, humanitarian access, and protection of civilians. Fundamental things that all the international community agree upon. But then, very important, also the political perspective of a political resolution that for a just and durable peace, a comprehensive peace that includes a Palestinian state. This is the fundamentals of the equation. We can go on and on and on. They will come back. they need to be tackled, and peace-loving nations, Egypt among them, with others, need to work together to show that direction and to bring movement towards that hope of a political resolution. And I think again, I said in the beginning, the root causes of the conflict here are very clear. The context of it, where it is coming from. And I think we all know it. But the inability to, I feel that there is sometimes the inability to tackle the root causes of conflict in one area, in one region, is something historical, is something, no. It is dynamics of power that are behind it. It is dynamics of one party believing that it can achieve success over another party, And when there needs to come to the realization that is not going to work, it's not possible, and that when this realization comes, then these perspectives come into place. Sometimes it takes more time, but it needs these dynamics, or power dynamics, that needs to be tackled, again, internationally, regionally, in different ways. Go to youth, or someone wants to further elaborate on this?
Maybe we can take the Middle East, this question first, and then we come back to the youth and the other questions.
Yeah, thanks. I would just say that the United States, as many of you know, is focused right now on responding to the situation at hand. We're focused on immediate response. President Biden and other senior U.S. officials have said publicly many times that we understand and support Israel's right to defend itself against a horrific terrorist attack. But in accordance with international humanitarian law, we have consistently stated that it is vital to avoid civilian casualties. We're also focused right now on the delivery of humanitarian assistance. We were glad to see trucks begin to move into the Gaza Strip relatively recently. We know it's not enough. We're working to do more. And we're working with Egypt and others to facilitate delivery of humanitarian assistance. We're also working intensely to secure the release of all hostages taken by Hamas. Over the long term, we continue to believe that a negotiated two-state solution is the best way to resolve the conflict. Obviously, that's not easy, but it is something we will continue to work toward, and it is something that is in our minds even as we're working to respond right now to the evolving situation on the ground.
Thank you, Annika, and thank you for the extremely thoughtful interventions and timely ones. I can say that the summary of what is required has been outlined plainly. And at the center of that is humanity. And whatever efforts are made, they should be done so with that intent. I think it's very difficult for us to draw comparisons. Human suffering is particular, and the tragedy in Gaza and the horrific events of October 7 are particular. We don't draw false equivocations. And you put your finger on something which other colleagues were also touching on, the way in which historical injustices breed, we're talking about the summit for the future injustices, if remained unaddressed. My plea is that this tragedy and horrific circumstances does not continue to create further vacuum for the types of solutions that my colleagues have outlined. There is a moment where consequential decision-making through leadership and cooperation is required, and that's now. Simultaneously, I don't know if anyone noticed earlier this week, but the Secretary General of the United Nations was standing on the foothills of the Himalayas. Did you see that? Yeah. And this is after very bold speeches prior to and in the context of Security Council and General Assembly debates, I was confused initially. And then I understood what his symbolic action was about. The world in which we live is going through monumental types of crises. And we must have a bandwidth that is greater than news cycles as presented. And we must be able to also give the requisite attention to the catastrophes surrounding climate, peace, and security simultaneously. And we must also give voice, as our colleague has, to human suffering without comparison or equivocation, but particularity in all parts of the world. And my dear colleague Frank Kaitare has asked some critical questions, Annika, that I hope we can reflect on together. I should have openly stated this is actually a majority interpeace audience. It's not.
There's a few GCSP too. No.
But this question of values in relation to interests gets to the heart of what we're talking about now and the passionate message you have conveyed. And ultimately, for me, that's about clear strategic leadership that understands short-term interest gains is not in the interest of national interest, in the bigger use of the term, with regards to sustainable, more resilient, robust peace, and to place values, human, environmentally centered values ahead of narrow interest is what leadership is about and what durable peace requires.
That was a fantastic initiation of a concluding remarks, I think. But
Yeah, that
Fleur,
was hard
please.
to follow. I don't know how long. Just
No,
perhaps-
we still have a few, and I would like also for people to engage on the youth question,
Absolutely.
the
So-
empowering engagement on youth. Please.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of following on from Tonde, if I can, youth are critical. And I think coming back to this values and interests, I question whether we need to bring in to the basics of human needs, back to the heart. If we think of human rights, it comes back to human needs. What are our fundamental needs? And if we think of what are the needs of the next generation, and how are they going to be able to have a vision that they can get behind and buy into, then I think it will define more acutely our values and interests. At the moment, they're being driven by those that are in power and have the power, and we need to think about the power of the next generation and how they are going to be empowered, how they are going to have a legacy. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with all of those aspects of youth empowerment, but I think in terms of concrete mechanisms, there's youth assemblies, that political participation. We need to have dialogue, inclusive dialogue. We need to have also trauma healing. So we've been working with a civil society activist who's advancing the youth and women peace and security agenda in Nairobi. And she goes literally around the communities, building trust between youth gangs who are carrying arms because they're protecting themselves. They're also afraid of the police who go about with have been doing extrajudicial killings, which they're now managing to address. But she's going around starting with trauma healing, because if you don't get to the heart of those fears and those insecurities that those people feel, then you're not going to be able to move forward. And then the next stage is giving them something to focus their lives on, a purpose, a sense of belonging, a job, a belief that they can make a future for themselves that is better than the one that they've inherited.
All right, thank you so much, Fleur. Yes?
I would fully support everything you said. We recognize that youth are absolutely critical, during the consultations I mentioned earlier, as we were coming up with our plans of action in these priority countries region, we spent a lot of time consulting with youth and taking on board their views and trying to incorporate them in our programming. And youth are the focus of many of our programs in countries around the world as we look to foster resilience and promote peace and stability. And we're increasingly focused on the youth peace and security agenda. One of my colleagues in the audience is spending a great deal of time looking at that and how the United States can incorporate it into its policies and programs around the world, and how we can better contribute to that agenda globally.
Right. Great.
Yeah, thank you. Just on youth, of course, very important for Africa in particular. Africa, most youthful continent. There was an article in New York Times about this, very interesting, a couple of days ago. No, I think we've seen a lot of progress in terms of assemblies. I think ambassadors and youth envoys and all of that is fantastic. African Union, by the way, has something called the African Youth Peace and African Union Peace, Youth and Security Ambassadors. A great mechanism of really for each region in Africa to bring forward a youth peace and security ambassadors, and it's a great initiative, and we've been working closely with them. Maybe we've not talked a lot about financing of peace building. I wish we had more time to have talking about that. And again, we relies a lot on, particularly in the UN, we talked about, how we need UN-assessed contributions for African peace-led enforcement. But in the UN, funding of peace building is voluntary contribution still, and there's also strong momentum towards, tapping into assessed contributions there. And I think it's a very important issue. And it brings me to financing of peace building for youth initiatives. And that is something that lacks considerably still, and we see it on the ground in many parts of Africa. It's something that we want to focus on in the next Aswan Forum, and to see how we can move the needle on that very concretely in UN programs, mechanisms, and other initiatives and funding schemes that can help address the thirst of entrepreneurship, of action, of knowledge, of engagement in youth that we find on many of these issues, while connecting them together, climate, peace, security, development, because, again, we need holistic solutions, even when you're talking about youth engagement. Thank you.
Annika, if I may.
Absolutely.
I have nothing against my own gender, but I'll say this. The days of older men from particular regions making decisions on behalf of others exclusively are over. And if they're not over, it's a bad future prospect for all of us. The involvement of youth is not merely a principled perspective, but a necessary one. In the same way we speak about inclusivity with regards to women. The role of youth, for all the reasons described, is part and parcel. What I'm appreciating so far of the organization I am new to is that we don't always talk about women, peace, and security. We don't necessarily always even talk about youth, peace, and security, although it's there. But what I'm observing is that those notions and those value propositions are embedded in the work that we do, whether it be in the security sector, whether it be with regards to engagement in reconciliation processes. We may not articulate it as such, but I think in a more holistic way, they are reflected in what we do. And I can ascribe to that, but I mean it. If we think that we can go to a summit of the future, and I would prefer to use the plural, futures, because there's no singularity of experience in that regard, and we have multiple directions in which we will all be moving. But if we think we can go there without the meaningful participation of youth, then we are doomed to fail for future generations.
Thank you. Thank you. Colleagues, we have a couple of questions, so let's say we take 2 more questions and see if there's someone. You're first on the list if there's no others, because, okay, we have David, the Swiss FDFA, another one who hasn't raised a question. Anyone here? Yes. And those who don't want to raise the second question. Oh, yeah, you see, it's proactive leadership. You go ahead.
All right.
Because you got the mic.
That's good.
Short and concise.
I want to follow up on my previous remark and also hearken back to your statement and appeal for concrete results of this panel. And the whole theme of the panel or the session is priorities for action and actionable results for the summit of the future. And I think that there is some success in one sense. And I would like to credit Ambassador Latif, if I may, for, I believe, producing something that is indeed actionable and I think even could usefully be reported to the Secretary General, which is to say that there should probably be at least one compelling outcome of the summit of the future, and that is that moving beyond 2030, that the sustainable development agenda be complemented by a peace-building agenda, and that there be 2 pillars of peace-building and sustainable development under the general chapeau of building global resilience and moving forward. Because right now, you have sustainable development kind of in one silo over here, and you've got peace-building in another silo, and that's nonsensical. These are interactive and basically come together quite harmoniously, it seems to me, in mutual support. So what I would recommend then, in inviting comment, is to say that do we have a result here, an actionable result by the panelists? And if you look at that timeline, that's beyond 2030, but the summit of the future might be usefully followed up by a summit for global resilience to set the stage for the agenda for, well, the next phase. Otherwise, we have the Millennium Development Goals, we have the Sustainable Development Goals. Each of them have sort of fallen short in some areas, but if we're going to sustain the energy and move forward, we're going to need to shift, to make a paradigm shift, to invest new energy, and we need to invest that in the enthusiasm of youth, as the last set of discussions emphasized, and I'll leave it at that for open for comment. But thank you, Ambassador Latif, for what I think is a very compelling contribution intellectually of combining the 2 for the future.
Thank you so much. Oops, David, up there, and then down here. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to the panelists for your expertise, for the elements that you shared with us today. As Annika said, I work at the Swiss FDFA. I'm not expressing myself in the name of my employer, but I just wanted to share with you a couple of thoughts and just one blunt question. When we speak about the Security Council, which is not able to make a decision at the moment, I would rather speak about this specific Security Council instead of the Security Council. I think it's just a small rhetoric remarks, but I think it helps maybe to better understand what we're talking about, and that's also something that we try to do as an elected member of the council. We try to speak about this council instead of the council, because this council is just a specific moment of interactions between 15 delegations that all have their own political agendas and try to find compromise on specific products. That's one remark. And one blunt question, which follows what the gentleman was speaking about before. I'm puzzled. I mean, I'm at the beginning of my career, but I'm puzzled at trying to understand and trying to decipher the different complexities of multilateralism. You have the new Geneva Peace, you've got the Summit of the Future, you've got different products. I think multilateralism is quite often about products meeting processes and then processes meeting other products. Just one blunt question, why don't we just keep the SDGs beyond 2030 so that we have a common roadmap on which we've been working for quite some time, and we push them up until 2050 so that maybe ideally we'll try to be able to, I don't know, achieve maybe 1/3 of the SDGs in 2050? I don't know. That's just one suggestion here.
Thank you very much. Very concrete. Yes, and then we have a final one here. Mr. Kagome is friends with everybody. We spend the afternoon here. Yeah, absolutely. So we have a final one, and then there's no more. Yes.
Hello, my name is Johanna Wolf de Tafur. I'm a senior peace and security consultant, and I work for WINS Global Consult, a consulting agency in Berlin. I've worked in DR Congo for quite some time as a peacekeeper and also as a peace and security consultant. And I wanted to address the issue of youth and youth involvement. To not be too critical, but I have the feeling that we have done a lot of workshops with youth, and we're inviting them, we're harvesting their creative ideas, and then we send them back into poverty, right? So how do we actually tackle the issue of youth unemployment and of actually providing them a future worth living in?
Okay, thank you very much. And then we have a final one over in the corner there. Sorry, there's another. At least one of us get to exercise this afternoon. Thank you very much. And I'm also inviting the panelists to think about your concluding remark, the short one, your one actionable recommendation.
Thank you. Merci. Hi, hello. I'm Victor Santos. I'm a consultant with UNCTAD. I'm a former C77 diplomat. My question, I was very, very passionate and intrigued about how we could deal with the issue of climate finance going forward, but I kind of wanted to react to the comment that was made about the peace and security vis-a-vis the SDGs, because of course we had the experiment of the 205 summit, which looked further on the issue of peace and security and development. But basically with the SDGs, we went back to more to the 2000 model, in which we gave more to the development pillar and the three pillars, like the central role. So vis-a-vis what was the experience of the panelists, do they think really that we could go back to the 2005 model? Or given that we have three major systemic crises, the COVID, the disruption of geopolitical crisis, and of course that we are very much behind on financing, particularly in Africa. I mean, we're like hundreds of billions behind. I mean, the mobilization of private finance never happened. Private sector is not massively investing. So is it that we need to, as has been said, like postpone for 10 or 20 years the SDGs achievement, and then focus on different ways of mobilizing finance, like merging climate finance with SDGs, or just simply looking into SMEs to try to bridge the gap? I mean, are they really thinking outside of the box, or are we just going to wake up in 2030 and say, hey, 80% of the agenda is not met?
All right, thank you so much. Colleagues, we have a challenge. We realized that time was running away, so I will invite the panelists to respond to preferably one of the questions, and not the same ones, actually. So we'll cover the questions, but not everybody is responding to everything. And those of you that feel like you also want to have the feedback on some of the other panelists, please stay behind after we finish. And then with one concluding thought, as you have had the conversation now, if there's the one actionable recommendation, prioritize, that you would like to say. Who want to go first? And I'll give you 15 seconds extra for those who go first.
Okay, I'll seize the mantle. Okay, so SDGs, extending possibly, but are we doing enough, or are we just not investing enough? SDG 5 on gender equality, we only have one of the goals is close to target. And so the investment has just not been sufficient. And if I go back to my earlier point, it's about the systemic, holistic view of it. And if we think of the climate finance, it's really seeing how these topics are related. If we invest in equality of women and girls, then we will also accelerate the climate agenda. And there are certain of these smart investments, if I can, that will accelerate us further faster. But while we're spending 2.4 trillion on arms, we're not going to get there. And so for me, I think we can move forward fast, and we have accelerators. Gender equality is definitely one of them. And if we can identify those, I think we can be more effective.
Thank you. Excellent.
Last 2.5 years, I have been based in Addis Ababa as a permanent representative to the African Union for a humanitarian institution, IFRC. And one of the things that struck me most was the identification of systemic issues such as food security and public health security and trying to bring about the requisite resources to get to scale. And the concreteness of identifying particularly those two, I think, draws so many lessons for our field in peace building. I was speaking with Liz, who's here with us from the Alliance for Peace Building, of which we are a member, and perhaps many of you are as well, about why is it that we're not having those same discussions in the peace building space. Or maybe we are, I'm not a part of them, where we can look at a continental scale on fundamental issues around peace and security and have the requisite resources, I'm looking to my right and others, the requisite resources to really inject systems change. In the same way we're talking about public health security and food security with all of the right institutions and individuals in the room. It seems obvious and yet terribly absent. And I think getting to what the two gentlemen were describing for me is that tangibility and identification of issues with the requisite resources to bear and the right folks in the room to do it.
And
Thank
that we have, wonderfully, handing over the microphone. Excellent.
Oh, I would just say, I talked earlier about the importance of localization in the development of the new Agenda for Peace, but I think it's also important to continue an emphasis on inclusion and equity, because exclusion and inequity obviously are at the heart of so many of the conflicts we see around the world. And we've had, I've really enjoyed hearing from my fellow panelists. I've enjoyed hearing from you all. So thanks very much for sharing your thoughts and comments.
All right, great. Ambassador.
Difficult to be last here. I said earlier this morning, I mean, my biggest concern regarding the Summit of the Future and the proposals we're discussing is that we end up giving baby aspirin to someone who has organ failure, and that is really what should not happen, because then, and this is also big risk that the outcome then are met with indifference, and nothing is worse to happen to a collective, or then that it becomes we are indifferent to it or what it says or what it does or what it announces, etc. So that is a risk that we should be guarded against. On the SDGs and the peace and thank you for pointing to this interlinkages. They cannot work without reform of global governance, without reform of IFIs and MDBs. Most African countries today are paying more debt service than SDGs or development efforts. 4% of climate finance globally goes to Africa. It's untenable. It's untenable with the magnitude of the crisis and disasters we are looking at. So I think this is really, and I think the UN and has been very vocal on this. I think that is something. There's the Bridgetown agenda in Sharm el-Sheikh. Climate finance was mentioned for the first time in the outcome of a COP. So this really needs to move together. And when we talk about integrated responses and holistic solutions, we need to put in place the mechanism, the platforms, the alliances, the coalitions that move these things, because they will not move on their own if they're just left floating around, or to organizations whose mandate is not set up to move them forward. And this is where the bold ideas and initiatives really can come forward. And just if I can make, you mentioned something very important about the country we are in, Switzerland, and the history it has, and very inspiring for peace builders. This is a country that was at war for hundreds of years internally between Catholic and Protestant, and it ended. And the social engineering behind that is formidable to reflect on. And there was I was talking to an academic, African academic, who told me this is the era that we should be looking at, that experience, the historical experience, to reflect on managing differences and building lasting peace that addresses root causes of conflict. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Ambassador, and thank you all colleagues. We are a few minutes over, but I hope we wanted to invest as much as we could in the Summit of the Future, and of course the future, the youth that came to the center of the concluding minutes of the conversation. So warmest thanks to the panelists. Also warmest thanks to all of you who participated and proactively contributed your ideas. If you wake up in the middle of the night and think, oh my God, I should have raised this one. This is really a game changer. Please send them to us, and we will forward them very quickly to Adam Day and UN University, because they're pulling together the outcome of this, the whole week. So which we have the platform. We're very appreciative of the broader partnership, not only the partners of the Geneva Peace Week and platform, but also the extended Geneva partnership, and of course the global partnership that have all come together for this conversation. So thank you so much for your wonderful ideas, and we really look forward to seeing you at the next event. And of course also a particular thank you to our GCSB alumni community. We have some alumni hubs also here. So thanks everyone, and have a good afternoon.